Aloha! This is Jason from Hawaii. Welcome to a special edition of the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast. In this episode, I will be interviewing writer, artist Adam Gorham. He is the artist on the Blue Flame from Vault Comics, and he is here to promote his book from IDW, Godzilla Rivals versus King Ghidorah. Now, this book marks his writing debut. Adam, I want to be the first to congratulate you on this. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Now, this Godzilla-sized one-shot comes out on December 22nd, and I'm hoping I got the previews code correctly. It's OCT210380. Now, Adam, how are you doing today?
I'm very well. It's been a busy week and I'm a little scatterbrained, but I'm doing pretty well overall. Thank you for asking. I'm excited to be here and to talk about, we'll talk about all kinds of things.
Yes, no, thank you Adam, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much. Now, listeners, I want to go over Adam's history a little bit. So, and like I said, Adam, please correct me at any point, So now, correct me if I'm wrong. So your first comic book that you drew was an original graphic novel called The Vampire Conspiracies in 2009. Is that correct?
Yeah, 2009.
Okay. And then your next work that you did is, and I'm going to try to pronounce the name correctly, Teuton.
Yep.
It's from, now correct me if I'm wrong, if I got the publisher's name wrong. Big Sexy Comics?
Yeah, that's what we called ourselves. I mean, it was self-published.
Okay.
Fred Kennedy created and wrote Teuton with me. We were two indie kids and were doing our own indie comics, and so I find like a lot of people who start out doing indie stuff, it isn't enough to just make your own book. You need your own imprint name, things like that. So all of the trappings of what we perceive as making a comic book real and tangible, right? Mm-hmm. So Fred is from a part of Canada called Alberta, Edmonton, to be exact. And he had a friend named Tony Sklepik, who is just an amazing tattoo artist out in Edmonton, Alberta. And they were going to make some comics together. Now, as Fred explained it to me, one of Tony's monikers is Big Sexy. So when they were making, before I met Fred and we got making comics together, he and Tony wanted to, start their own imprint called Big Sexy Comics. So I would meet Fred a little after that. And so the name Big Sexy was already kind of in place. And I was fine with it, But yeah, so it's like Big Sexy Comics is not, it's not an official thing or anything like that, but that's what we call ourselves.
Now, for our listeners, and Adam, correct me if I'm wrong. Now, I know this is a 3-volume. There's 3 volumes to this, and correct me if I'm wrong. It's regarding the Crusades, correct?
Yeah. So Teuton is it's a story that Fred conceived of, and it's basically, Fred's a huge history buff and loves stories about tactical warfare and things of that nature, and in particular medieval history. Mm-hmm. So our story takes place during the Third Crusades. My memory is not what it once was, but I believe it takes place during the Crusades, and it follows a legion of Teutonic knights who were in Lithuania and fighting with pagans. And our main character, who's a sword brother named Andros Tam, along their way encounters the pagan gods in real life. It turns out that they're very much real, and they've got things going on, and so Andros gets embroiled in this conflict in Lithuania, where he is kind of stranger in a strange land,
Mm-hmm.
an adversary of the people that he, is now having to align himself with
Mm-hmm.
in this conflict. So it's part, like it's kind of Clash of the Titans-y, but in a medieval in a
Mm-hmm.
medieval setting, and it deals a lot with Lithuanian folklore.
That sounds pretty cool. I'm sorry, I'm going off the cuff here. Is it available through Amazon or?
No, it was self-published. So I actually don't know if it's available to purchase anywhere online. We
Mm-hmm.
mainly sold it at shows here in Toronto, locally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know, like I have copies lying around.
Mm-hmm.
Fred has copies lying around. So anybody listening who would like to, there's 3 trade paperbacks. It's a
Mm-hmm.
trilogy. Well, it's one story, but told in 3 volumes. And so if there are people who are interested, they're welcome to contact either myself or Fred,
Okay.
because we do, it's still available, but it's not, widely available.
Oh, okay. All right. And then and then when you talk about Fred now, correct, and then, sorry, I'm gonna add this on that. Now, is Fred still a Toronto radio personality called Fearless Fred Kennedy? Is he still, working in radio?
Yeah. Fred's still in broadcasting. So he's, doing afternoons at Q107. And he's one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. And, you know, one of the reasons that I was listening to radio for the first time in a long time, and in fact, that is how we discovered each other. I had, as you said, my first comic was a graphic novel called The Vampire Conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just completed that and was now looking for ways to sell it to make some money.
Mm-hmm.
So I was driving around the Greater Toronto area to various places looking to see if I could get placement at these stores. Just literally driving to comic shops with copies of the book in my car and asking if they would either carry it or do some kind of, um, deal with me on either buy copies or just on consignment.
Mm-hmm.
And so that summer, as I was driving around, I kept hearing this guy on the radio, and there's like a lot of road work being done that year,
Mm-hmm.
so there was a lot of
Yes.
time spent in traffic, and I'm listening to him, and he's there's this guy on the alternative rock station talking about how he's got like Green Lantern comics, and he's got all these comic tattoos, so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I got it in my head that I should write this guy, ask him if he would want to talk about my comic either on air or whatever, and maybe that would help sell some books. So I wrote
Mm-hmm.
him up, and he got back in touch with me and said, I checked out your stuff, and I'm trying to write and create comics myself. Would you be interested in teaming up?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was how I found my second gig.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That is pretty cool. And then
we've been good friends ever since.
Mm-hmm. And then now before I continue, and let me just continue on, and then I'll ask how people can contact you and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So and before I continue, listeners, right now there is a yardman outside doing some yard work. I'm hoping you guys don't hear it on the microphone. So hopefully, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to continue on with your history. So, and then you did some work for Marvel, the New Mutants Dead Souls miniseries in 2018.
That's correct.
Now Punk Mambo from Valiant in 2018. Is that correct?
Yeah, 1819, but
okay.
New Mutants followed by Punk Mambo.
Okay. And then I know you did a miniseries Rocket. Now this is Rocket Raccoon, the Blue River Score miniseries.
Mm-hmm.
Dead Drop. Was that a miniseries from Valiant Comics?
Yeah, it was a 4-issue miniseries.
Okay. And then I know you did some Teenage Ninja Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Mm-hmm.
And also you contributed to the Toronto Comics anthology.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is something I want to look for the trade. You did The Violent from Image Comics, and that was in 2015.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that, to pick that up and reading that, check that out.
Oh, good. Well, I hope you do check it out. It's one of the books that I'm most proudest of.
Mm-hmm.
So for those who don't know, like the violent was actually one of the very first professional things that I did,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so created by Ed Brisson, myself, Mike Garland, Tom Muller, um, and it's a Canadian crime comic, and there aren't many comics set in Canada or about Canadians, and
Mm-hmm.
so
Yes.
Ed and I are both Canadian, and Ed's a writer that I was a fan of beforehand, and so it's a story about this husband and wife who had kind of a troublesome life,
Mm-hmm.
uh, problems with drugs and what have you, and got themselves cleaned up after the birth of their child, and are trying to live a straight and narrow life,
Mm-hmm.
and their darker past catches up with them, and it's set in Vancouver, and deals with a lot of the real world problems that Vancouver faces to this
Mm-hmm.
day. So it's a very grounded and realistic crime tale
Mm-hmm.
about people who are people that I've known, that I've basically, we wanted you to read this book and feel like it was something that you could easily see on your evening news,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, I guess that was like 2014, 2015.
Mm-hmm.
But that was it was doing my work on that, actually, the gritty crime stuff, I think, is what got Marvel to consider me for Rocket,
Mm-hmm.
which was being written by Al Ewing, and
Mm-hmm.
was a miniseries that focused on Rocket's exploits when he wasn't with the Guardians,
Mm-hmm.
and it explored his criminal past,
Yeah.
um, but the take on it was telling a Rocket story as if it were like a Raymond Chandler novel. So it was like a neo noir in
Mm-hmm.
space. Rocket has a femme fatale that asks for his help and puts him in a dangerous situation, and
Mm-hmm.
there's twists and turns and double crosses and heartbreak,
Mm-hmm.
all wrapped within this story about a space raccoon.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a lot of fun. But yeah, I think my work on the violent made me a perfect fit for this raccoon comic. So, but it was so that was my first work at Marvel. And it's something I'm still very proud of.
That is so cool. So again, listeners, if you are interested in picking up the Violent, now I know, please, go to your local comic shops, order it through them. Let's see. And then the Rocket miniseries, Rocket, the Blue River Score. Again, go to your comic shops, order through them, or I believe it's probably available on Marvel Unlimited right now. So,
Yeah. And I've been, there's that new Guardians of the Galaxy game, and I think that there's a skin for Rocket that's based on his look in our comic. So I've been, I think there's been some new interest in the book as a result. So, by all means, everybody go back and read that book, buy it digitally.
that is so cool. That's pretty cool. How cool? I'm going off the cuff. How cool was that you heard about that they're using, that for the game? Your design
It's
for the
neat.
game.
Yeah, it's a neat little thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's really with work for hire stuff and stuff for like either Marvel or DC.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think for any creator, the idea of contributing to this tapestry is pretty fun. You know what I mean? Like, they're characters that you never really get to own. They never really become yours.
Mm-hmm.
You're just
Yeah.
kind of, there's that, there's an old expression about how, like, you're just playing with somebody else's toys, and when you're done, you got to put them away. And it's true. And like, I'm a big proponent of creator-owned comics and
Mm-hmm.
what have you, but like getting to work for a publisher with characters that you have known and appreciated for for as long, like speaking for myself anyway, for that I grew up reading comics, and so getting to work for Marvel is a huge deal, and getting to contribute to that. And at the end of the day, you kind of hope that you have some impact that lasts. And so it's nice to think that I have. And so little things like Rocket having a skin in a video game or an action figure or something like that, it doesn't sustain me in perhaps any meaningful way, but it is a nice little claim to fame.
Yes. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, so Adam, did I miss anything?
I mean, possibly. Like I've got a lot under my belt so far, but as you say, like I did some turtle stuff pretty early on. I inked some stuff for my buddy Michael Walsh, who drew a Ninja Turtles and X-Files crossover, and that's kind of how I got my start, both at IDW and with published comics in general. And then from there, like I had made inroads with different creators, and I did an issue of Zero, written and created by Alish Kott. I think that was issue 12, and so that was like the first full, I think, I won't say the first full comic that I drew, but it was the first widely published thing that I had drawn, and really just kind of kept climbing the ladder from there. And so Ed and I had been in the process of pitching the Violent when Valiant offered me this 4-issue miniseries called Dead Drop that Alish Kott was writing, and we had just done Zero together, so he thought of me for that project. And that was my first experience with drawing superhero comics. So that was really fun and challenging and exciting, and I think I hope introduced people to my work and kind of got them primed for whatever Ed and I might be doing on the Violent. And then from the Violent, I went to Marvel, and while drawing Rocket, I drew some pages in an issue of Black Panther and different things here and there, before going off to New Mutants, Dead Souls. And after that, back to Valiant for Punk Mambo, and getting pretty close to where I'm at currently, I suppose. But so I finished Punk Mambo, and then was returning for another, I believe, when the pandemic hit, and that kind of put a lot of things in jeopardy in terms of like what was being published and when. And so I had to take some time to find my next long-term project, but in the interim I did an issue of Savage Avengers, an issue in a 5-part miniseries from Marvel called Contagion, where oddly enough, it was about a plague pandemic that the superheroes had to stop. Literally, I think the winter before the pandemic hit. But at any rate, so doing different things for Marvels while doing covers at Vault Comics and various other publishers. And then while doing steady cover work at Vault, landed a gig called The Blue Flame with creator Christopher Cantwell.
Okay, and then so listeners, we will touch upon the Blue Flame in a little bit. So Adam, I want to ask you, where can listeners follow you on social media?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram. My handles for both are at Adam T. Gorham, Gorham, and I'm fairly active on both. If you enjoy seeing my art, is in particular my art process, Instagram is definitely something you want to check out. And I also share a lot of stuff on Twitter, and tweet a lot of dumb ideas out there. So if that's your bag, then
Hmm.
that's where you want to be to get all that goodness.
And then one last thing, for if a listener is interested in getting at least checking out a volume of Teuton, how can they get a hold of you?
My email is probably the best way to do that.
Hmm.
Adam.gorham@live.ca.
Hmm.
Or, tweet at me, uh, send me a DM on Instagram. Uh, both of those are perfectly acceptable.
Okay, all right, thank you. Now before we really get into the meat of the interview, I want to encourage listeners to also check out Adam's other interview that he did on the Speech Bubble podcast. Now that was dated last year, January 20th, 2020. Excuse me. That podcast episode goes into a deep dive into Adam's origin story. And listeners, I listened to that interview and it was a very good interview. It really was. So yeah, so if you
Oh,
guys
I'm
get a
glad you
chance to check it
enjoyed
out.
it.
So, all right. So Adam, where did you grow up?
I was born in a rural town in Ontario called Perth, and when I was 2, my family moved to Mississauga, which is
Hmm.
a suburb of Toronto,
Hmm.
and I've lived there ever since.
Hmm.
I'm still there now and raising a family here.
And then what was or were your first comics that you read?
Well, I mean, that's a
Yeah. Hmm.
little tough to answer because I don't think that I properly read a comic for a very long time, despite having a few of them. I was always picking up comics for the art.
Hmm.
And so I honestly don't recall what the very first comic I ever had was, but I know that the first comic I got that left a lasting impression on me
Hmm.
was a trade paperback collection of Batman the Cult. Um, so this was, I mean, I don't think I was like maybe 8 or 10 or something like that.
Hmm.
And so this was in the early to mid 90s,
Hmm.
and we were still within the comics bubble at that point. And
Hmm.
so lots of places that weren't carrying comics before that were suddenly on that bandwagon. So
Hmm.
near the building where I grew up in was a mall, and in the mall was a like cigar newsstand
Hmm.
type store, and like not like it's the type of place where you could like buy magazines and newspapers from different parts of the world, and and at that time, lots and lots of comics, and so they were actually pretty good at carrying everything that was fairly current.
Hmm.
Um, and so, for one reason or another, my dad went in there and, picked up this Batman graphic novel that he
Hmm.
thought that I would like
Hmm.
without, I'm assuming, ever having looked inside of it, because that's like a pretty intense story to give a child.
Hmm.
But nevertheless, I loved it,
Yes.
and it was the type of story that even without reading, because my reading comprehension wasn't super back then, um, being a kid, it was the type of story where you could follow along pretty well visually.
Hmm.
It was just illustrated by Bernie Wrightson,
Yes.
and his art has stayed with me ever since. And
Hmm.
so that was a very precious book to me. And then, over time, there were different comics that I would either get with my allowance, and because for the most part, I was buying my comics with my allowance,
Hmm.
which meant that I wasn't getting any one thing consistently
Hmm.
or all that many.
Yeah.
But I would get the odd issue of like a Spider-Man or a Batman or an X-Men.
Hmm.
Um, I remember getting the first issue of like Malibu Street Fighter, or
Hmm.
I think Malibu Comics might have also done Mortal Kombat, but
Hmm.
I got those, just things that I would recognize. And the first kind of like mini series that I ever followed would have been an Aliens versus Predator comic. Um,
Yes.
uh, so this was like a 6-issue miniseries, and like it followed a plot that the AVP movie closely resembled,
Hmm.
except it was set on kind of like a Montanan planet, like a planet that was very much like Montana.
Yes. Hmm.
Um, and but like hit all the same beats as I think every AVP story does. But that was like the first time that I experienced, because I was aware of Predator. Like I had seen, I think, Predator 2 maybe at that point. And because I know that I saw 2 before 1, and I was aware of Aliens, but just the idea that these 2 different established properties could come together in comic form was super, super fun to me. You know what I mean? And, to me at the time was like, this is the power of the medium. So that was the first kind of like miniseries that I got from beginning to end. And it felt fun, like reading it. I was like, it's like I'm reading a movie. But yeah, like I didn't collect anything steadily for a very long time. Not until I was making my own money anyway.
Okay. And then let's see. How did you break into comics?
Well, breaking in implies that it all happened somewhat fast and immediately. And I think everybody's story is very different.
Yes.
And it's never really all that fast. So the term breaking in is, I kind of think of it as like, how did you make your climb in the comics? Like it's a journey. Like it's not opening a door and entering. Like everybody I know who's working in comics, it's been a series of progressions. And so for me, I think like I for a long time, when I was an art student, when I was done school but working full time, I was always saying out loud how I wanted to be a comic book artist. And it was kind of an obvious path for me, because I was I loved to draw. I loved comic books, and it seemed like the obvious choice, but there's no the entering the industry was very mysterious, as it is for most people. And I think that's why it's such a prevailing question. But the way I came to do it, and I guess the real truth of it, is that as soon as you make comics, you are in the business. You know what I mean? As soon as you start making comics, you're a comic book artist. You're a comic book creator. You're a part of the industry. You're part of this world. But also what I've come to learn is that when people ask, how did you break in? What they're really asking is, how did you start getting professional level work? Which is a perfectly natural thing to want to know. But like I got my start by, I was with the woman who I'm with now, my partner, and she's been the most supportive person in my life as far as my career goes. Well, really, in every aspect of my life, she's the most supportive. And so, she supported my ambition and nurtured it. And so she actually, in my 20s, she took me to my first comic convention.
Nice.
And so like I had never been to one before, and was kind of really too intimidated to go to one beforehand or on my own. I don't know what I thought they would be like. But in my mind, I wasn't ready to go to one, and I don't know what I was waiting for. But anyhow, like I got a real sense of the world from being dragged to go to one, and it, bolstered my confidence. And, I had gone from, so I was done with school and was working full time, and had just basically done a series of jobs that I just really didn't enjoy until I was, working in a grocery warehouse that really broke my spirits. And then I just sort of, decided, after I can't do these kinds of jobs anymore. There's, what after this is done, I'm going to make a go of it and see where that takes me and see how far I can go. And it was at that point that I went looking for work in comics online. And I I looked at the same places that I thought to look for any other kind of job, like monster.com.
Yeah.
But ultimately found a listing on Craigslist of all places
Mm-hmm.
for a job that would become the Vampire Conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was with a guy named Mark Morgenstern, who's
Mm-hmm.
he's a director,
Mm-hmm.
was directing commercials at the time, and wanted to adapt one of his films into a graphic novel, and that's how I cut my teeth. And then, really once, going back to what I said about just start making comics and you're in the
Yes.
business. Once I had that finished product, that book in my hands and under my belts, it was better than handing somebody a resume or a business card or a portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
You had a book, you had something to your name, and something tangible people could look at,
Yes.
and decide whether or not they wanted to give you their time or money.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first step. And so I just got to, acquainted myself with other creators in the Toronto scene, and and then kind of branched further out as time went by. And what's important, I think, for any creator is to just, not only, so first of all, don't wait for anybody to hand you a job to make comics. I was very fortunate in that I did find somebody who was actively looking for an artist, but before that, it would have been smart of me to have just start making the comics that I wanted to make.
Yes.
And because those opportunities, I was lucky, but not everybody will be lucky. And so it's worth your while to just start making comics on your own. You learn a lot that way. But yeah, and then so once you have something, you can just take that around and show people and make connections that way. And then enough, you do it enough. You don't stop at the one thing. I don't recommend starting your career with your magnum opus. But you do enough things, and you build yourself a little body of work where people see that you can do it and get it done, and you can do it consistently, and that see you're not going anywhere. You have the power to establish yourself. And then once I was kind of established as an entity, I made friends who were kind of on the same wavelength and skill level as I am, and we just kind of bonded and rose up in the ranks together. And you do something long enough, you hopefully get better at it, which I did. I excelled, and so my proving my talent got me jobs with higher profiles. And so and that was the slow and steady progression of breaking in. So I was lucky enough to be given work at Marvel in 2017, but I had been making comics since 2008, right? So it's no there's no overnight success. So the key to breaking into comics is just to make them. It sounds like really lazy advice, but there couldn't be any truer advice. The key to breaking in is a little complicated because there's no key to it. People work really hard to get work with publishers like Marvel or DC or whomever, and it doesn't always happen, or it takes a long time. And there could be all kinds of reasons why that might be so. But I should also point out that doesn't have to be anybody's definition of breaking in my opinion. As long as you're making comics, you've unlocked the door yourself. You're in.
Yes. Yeah. So I just want to touch upon the Vampire Conspiracy just a little bit.
Okay.
Have you seen the movie?
Yeah, I had to watch it to illustrate the comic.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's the Vampire Conspiracy, for those listening, is a it's a horror movie about vampires that's kind of a blend of Saw and gosh, I don't know what else to compare it to, but it takes the premise of Saw, where you have a group of unlikely strangers
Mm-hmm.
who find themselves in a maze-like circumstance, um, and they've all been, for reasons that they discover over the course of the story, they all share connections,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a master vampire orchestrating all of this, and so they have to get through this maze and solve puzzles, um, in order to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, uh, and as the more they learn and more to discover, the more they realize that they have reasons to hate each other,
Mm-hmm.
and possibly, even kill each other. So, I mean, that's the premise of the story in a nutshell. It's a very low budget horror movie,
Mm-hmm.
so it is what it is. There's really no getting
Yeah.
around that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main vampire was an actor from the Lilydale chicken commercials, which were a thing here in Canada.
Okay.
But yeah, yeah. So I've seen the movie.
Okay. Now, for listeners, if you are interested in checking out the Vampire Conspiracy movie, it is currently on Amazon Prime. So, all right. So, Adam, we've already talked about, the Vampire Conspiracy, your first working in comics. Now we're going to go to Godzilla Rivals versus King Ghidorah.
Yeah.
How did you get this awesome assignment?
I asked for it.
Nice.
Yeah, like I kind of can't believe that it happened, to be perfectly honest. But I'm very glad that it has.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, when I say I just asked for it, I don't mean to throw around any weight, but I've been doing consistent work with IDW for a while, and so I've developed a relationship with the people there, where the doors were, I guess, a little more open to me than anybody else.
Yes.
But for anybody listening who gets it in their head to just solicit ideas to publishers, please don't. They won't listen to them. So I didn't just write up an email and say, hey, I want to do this, but there is a courtship to it. You cannot give ideas or pitches unsolicited. You kind of got it. I did have to, so I have a couple of editors there who I am in contact with, and I broached the subject of I have this idea for a story. What's the protocol for approaching you with a story regarding licensed properties? Because I've pitched original stories to them before, and there's a protocol for that. But for this, they were just like, basically had to, you kind of ask permission to slide this by them. And when they were ready to, receive my idea, that's when I laid it on them. So, during the pandemic, like a lot of people, I was spinning my wheels a little bit and finding ways to keep sane. And one of those ways was I started collecting action figures, buying toys online. So before long, I found myself with a Godzilla figure on a shelf next to a space alien figure. And I just had this idea of, what if you took the premise of War of the Worlds and then put Godzilla in there? So aliens show up to destroy Earth, but now there's Godzilla. And that was the gist of what I was proposing. Now, coincidentally, they were, I guess, because IDW had recently gotten Godzilla back, and were trying to find something to do with him. And so they had a couple of things in the works. And one of the things that they were doing were a series of one-shots. And the one-shots each one-shot would revolve around a specific, Toho monster. Yeah, there you go. So Godzilla Rivals. So each issue focuses on one of his rivals. It's kind of, they're treated as self-contained stories. So they liked my idea about space invaders coming, messing with Earth and messing with Godzilla, and asked me if I could, incorporate things from the Toho wheelhouse, the Toho stable, of characters and creatures and what have you.
Yes.
So, I got my hands on King Ghidorah, which was the most obvious fit for that in the
Mm-hmm.
Zillions,
Yes.
um, and which is like I think one of the best kaiju to get to play with.
Mm-hmm.
At least one of the most iconic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's really how it came about. Like at first I just only wanted to write it because I wasn't confident in writing something and drawing it
Mm-hmm.
because I was, like I'm actively drawing a different series.
Yes.
So I wasn't sure how much time that I'd have to do it. But they were insistent that if I was going to write it, that I would draw it as well, which,
Mm-hmm.
is a pretty sweet deal. So,
Yes.
the team at IDW, my editors, Tom Waltz and Megan Brown, have just been super, super amazing and supportive of me in every regard of this project. So, I got to take my time writing it,
Yes.
and I'm now actively drawing it.
Wow. So, as a writer and an artist on this book, I'm just asking, did you write out a full script, or did you like have an outline already and then?
At first, all I had was just this nugget of an idea, like literally what I said. Like what if aliens came to?
Mm-hmm.
What if
Yes.
What if Mars invaded Earth and Godzilla showed up? And it was kind of like, well, tell us more about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, and
Yes.
then so I had to, I wrote up basically a plot outline.
Mm-hmm.
And it just talks about the story in very broad strokes. Martians invade Earth, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And so it's just basically looking at a story from a from a it's like you have a story and you take 10 steps back from it to see the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then so once I gave them that synopsis, it was like, okay, well, here's some things that you can do. Here are some things that Toho won't let you do.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So like it's like working with Toho is like working with any other licensed products. They
Mm-hmm.
need to control their brand, and so there was things that I wanted to do that they, I guess, aren't prepared to have in a Godzilla story.
Yeah.
But that is what it is. But I was given parameters to work within, and I managed to do that. So I started with an outline that I had to revise a couple of times. Then once we got an outline that was approved, then I went into writing the script. And so I knew that I was working with 40 pages, and so I basically broke the story down in 10-page increments. So these 10 pages will basically be this chapter of the story. The next 10 pages are the second chapter. And so I tackled the story in 10-page chunks, so, and I've drawn enough comics and read enough comic scripts to be very familiar with like the formatting and how to pace things. So that part was pretty fun. And there were some challenges in certain regards, like as an artist, it's pretty easy to plot action. You know what I mean? This explodes and then this smashes and so on. And then as it gets into more like, exposition and characters talking, and that's when things got a little more challenging for me. But again, like it was a real thrill to get to work through. And then so I worked through the script in 10-page increments until I submitted the whole thing, and then had to make revisions from there. But then, finally arrived at a place where it's like, this is it. Let's get to drawing.
Now, how big of a Godzilla fan are you?
I'm not the world's like I'm not I don't want to make myself sound like a fan, or sorry, an Uber fan, because I don't want anybody to come challenge me.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
But I have a fun relationship with Godzilla and the property. I watched Godzilla films at a pretty early age. And not in any way where I was like, I love Godzilla so much, but Godzilla is one of these interesting characters where he shows up in a lot of different areas of pop culture. Like he's somebody that I was aware of and familiar with before I even saw one of his movies. Like he's that ubiquitous. like when I was a kid, I had an inflatable punching doll that had Godzilla on it, with
Yeah.
like this like the sand at the bottom that little kids could bop.
Yeah.
I had one of those. I'm pretty sure that I had a Gigan action figure,
Oh, God.
not
Yes.
not knowing what Gigan was when I was a kid.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So like, like I think Godzilla in a way is, fairly saturated throughout pop culture
Mm-hmm.
in a very subtle respect. So I've always had an affection for Godzilla and giant monsters in general. But
Mm-hmm.
I have a vivid memory of seeing a black and white um, Godzilla movie. I think it might have been King of the Monsters, so the American version,
Mm-hmm.
when I was a kid. And but back in '97, when Roland Emmerich's
Yes.
American Godzilla movie was coming out, that really excited me in a big way, in a way that I still remember.
Mm-hmm.
And like, so say what you will about that movie or that take on Godzilla. In '97, I would have been in about like sixth or seventh grade. I was Independence Day had rocked my world.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there was kind of alien invasion films were in vogue
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
at that point in time. But I was the kid that the '90s Godzilla movie was made for. I dragged a friend of mine after school to go see it. I was just really excited. I was so hyped by the trailers because they were keeping the look of Godzilla under, a tight lid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted the spectacle. I bought into their hype machine and I watched the movie and I had a really good time watching it. And then, I left the movie thinking like, well, this didn't really hold up. Yeah. Like I loved this. This was less cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was in like a toy store not long after and I bought like it was like a little action figure set
Yeah.
that came with like a small Godzilla,
Mm-hmm.
some small army men, some small helicopters, things like that. And I played with that a lot, imagining my own version of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the Godzilla that I speak of is actually on my shelf over my shoulder. But I remember, talking to my friends at school, like, wouldn't it be cool if they did this,
Mm-hmm.
but then they made it about this or they changed this. I want to write my own thing, and
Mm-hmm.
this is like, a turning point in my life, I guess, because I remember saying like how I wanted to write my own version of this Godzilla tale.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend going like kind of sneering at me about it, like, why would you want to do that? The movie's made. It's done. And I remember thinking like, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of had that inside of me since 1997. But I've always thought Godzilla was pretty cool, and I've always drawn him for fun. And he was always a character that I wanted to, take my stab at. And I think he's also, based on the reaction to the legendary films, I think he's also a character that most audiences don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, I think many of the people who went in to see the legendary films hadn't really seen the earlier, like the original movies, and were unfamiliar with like the formula to these movies.
Mm-hmm.
And so they might have had mixed feelings about it, but anywho, suffice to say, I've always had love for the monster and in their world. And then but that really sped up over the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Because as I say, I got into collecting Godzilla figures, and I think about 14 at this point. And I had seen the different movies at different points of time.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they were on some TV channel or what have you, but I had seen them, but couldn't ever remember one whole movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I purchased that fancy pants Criterion collection of
Yes.
and so watched that with my children, and just fell in love with it all over again, and in many ways for the first time. So like I am definitely crazy about Godzilla, but I'm not ready to throw down with any experts.
Okay. So, one question I want to ask you: how excited were your comic book creator buddies when you told them that you got this this assignment?
I kept it pretty close to the chest for a while.
Okay.
I told one friend of mine, Michael Walsh, who's somebody that I speak to a lot, and is a good friend of mine. And he had been, telling me, we as artists kind of agreed that like the smart move is to start writing stuff, get into writing, and just as a way of taking control of our careers, not being reliant on writers. And nothing against writers, but like if you can write and draw your own stuff, it's a little more liberating. And so we were both trying to make strides in that regard. Michael now has the Silver Coin, his series at Image, which is exceptional. But he was encouraging me to do something similar. And so this opportunity came about, and I mentioned it to him, and he was extremely happy for me. I'm glad to say. And then, but I didn't want to talk about it for a little bit because it wasn't, you know what I mean? Like it was, I got the green light. I got the, I got the go ahead to like, okay, you can pitch it. You can write the outline. You can start writing the script. You can, but with each step it became a little more real, and the pressure to make it happen increased. But I was always worried that it could fold, and so I wasn't ready to tell most people. But as I spent more time working on it and became more real, I felt comfortable telling other friends of mine. And I don't think that there's anybody who kind of doesn't think Godzilla is cool, So when you say you get to write and draw your own Godzilla story for fun, like it seems like it's like going to a theme park. Like that's awesome. So it's everybody that I told to early on was extremely happy and supportive for me, and which feels great. It feels good to have friends who can be that way for you. And then once I got to really talk about it in a public space online, I heard from a lot of people who were extremely positive. So again, everything about this project is just, it's been fun, or it is fun since it's not technically over yet. But like everybody I've heard from has just been super cool about it.
That's pretty nice. Off the cuff question. So listeners, I know this is an audio podcast, but behind Adam there is a creature from the Black Lagoon mask hanging on his wall. So Adam, I'm just going to ask, do you ever think of writing a story about the creature from the Black Lagoon?
No, I love the creature. I love Gilman. He's super, like that movie is great. I haven't seen the sequel. But I don't think I have, if I were to do a story, it would be my version of that. I think the Universal monsters are like, they're so iconic.
Yes.
There doesn't need to be anything more done to them. Like I think they're perfect iterations of what those things are. And like I cherish, like I own those movies. I cherish them, and I don't think they need, I have nothing to contribute. But with each Universal monster, there is something, what makes there's something that makes them special, and so you can figure out what makes them special, and like, how do you do that? You know what I mean? And so rather than do what's been done, I would try to create my own creature.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to the next, to your current project that you're doing right now, and I'm going to be honest to our listeners. It's the Blue Flame. I have the issues on my reading stack. I'm a little behind on my reading.
We all are.
So correct me if I'm wrong, it's from Vault Comics.
Correct.
can I just ask you, can you just give us, can you tell listeners who might be interested to picking up this series, what's the story about?
Yeah, no problem. So the Blue Flame is a superhero,
Mm-hmm.
and he resides in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the United States. So by day, Sam Brossom
Mm-hmm.
is an HVAC repairman. By night, he's the Blue Flame, and
Mm-hmm.
he's kind of a blue collar, uh, local
Mm-hmm.
superhero who
Yes.
has superhero friends, and together they form a group called the Night Brigade.
Mm-hmm.
So they perform superheroic acts within the Milwaukee area,
Mm-hmm.
and they try to be a force for good in their community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at a further point in time, we also meet the Blue Flame when he's further along in his superhero career,
Mm-hmm.
and he's taken into deep unknown cosmic space by powerful alien beings who put him on trial for the fate of humanity. And so humanity is being judged by a tribunal of intergalactic space beings
Mm-hmm.
who are deciding whether or not humanity needs to continue.
Mm-hmm.
And they choose Sam, who's
Mm-hmm.
Earth's greatest hero,
Mm-hmm.
to stand trial and try and basically plead Earth's case, humanity's case. So you have these two storylines going back and forth. So seeing Sam in his early crime fighting days,
Mm-hmm.
and then seeing Sam at a much later point in his career. And as the story goes back and forth, you see how each story thread informs the other. But it's there's a big cosmic odyssey aspect to it, but there's also a very raw and street level aspect to it also. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, and it's deals with a lot of like heavy real life stuff. There's a lot of swashbuckling space fun. So it gets we take you high and we take you low.
Now, one more question before I start wrapping this up. So, who came up with the costume design for the Blue Flame?
I did.
Okay.
So, Chris Cantwell is a very vivid writer. And so in reading his scripts, he had a broad but pretty concise idea of what the Blue Flame would look like,
Mm-hmm.
or what he pictured the Blue Flame to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And so based on his writing, I put together this costume that I wanted to feel like was recognizable in an iconic way.
Mm-hmm.
Because we meet the Blue Flame as an already established hero.
Mm-hmm.
He's not getting an origin story. This is somebody he's an established character in his own world. So
Mm-hmm.
I wanted something that felt lived in, like,
Mm-hmm.
nothing we had to explain. So, like a kind of costume that people could kind of, there are other touchstones for, but that also felt, like original. So, something that played on nostalgia while also feeling fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an easy feat. It took me a while to come to crack that
Mm-hmm.
that costume, but I think I wound up with something that I'm very, very happy with,
Mm-hmm.
and the people seem to like. So, hopefully it stands the test of time.
Now, listeners, now I know issue 7 has not come out yet, but I've already seen but there's covers already online. I want to say I love the cover of issue number 7 where the Blue Flame is on a motorcycle, right?
Yeah.
That looks awesome. That looks great, and that really looks cool.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna start wrapping things up. Actually, I got 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Have you and your family been to Hawaii?
No, we very much want to.
Mm-hmm.
My girls are, they're aspiring beach bunnies.
Mm-hmm.
So Hawaii is a pretty attractive place.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's a destination for for some point in the future.
Oh yes, yeah, yes. Okay. Well, I'm just gonna let you know we do have comic book conventions here. And if any of the convention organizers in Hawaii are listening to this, please invite Adam and his family.
I'm a big deal. Please bring me to your convention.
Yes. All right. And then final question, any last words to our listeners?
Gosh, any last words? It sounds so final. I'm, you know what? Like I'm working on the Godzilla comic,
Yes.
Godzilla Rivals King Ghidorah. That's out in December, at the end of December. So look forward to that. Obviously, the Blue Flame and you know, uh, oh gosh, where am I going with this? But like you can, if you're interested in commissions or original art, I have an art rep who's named Cam. So you can contact Cam at inkyknuckles.com for all art inquiries. You can even check out his website, inkyknuckles.com, to browse on what's already up for sale.
Mm-hmm.
Follow me online and just to see what I'm up to and what I'm about. But that's really all I can think of. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Adam, thank you very much. Adam, I want to wish you all the success with Godzilla Rivals versus King Ghidorah and the Blue Flame. And I also want to wish you a continued success in the comic book industry.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
And then Adam, mahalo, that's thank you in Hawaiian, for your time and giving me the opportunity to interview you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your interest in having a chat with me. So I was very happy to do it, and I enjoyed speaking with you.
Oh, thank you, Adam. Thank you very much. Now, if you are a new reader or a lifelong reader or a big Godzilla fan, please check out Adam's Godzilla Rivals versus King Ghidorah. It's coming out on December 22nd, and I believe the previous code is OCT210380. And also, please check out his ongoing series, The Blue Flame, by Vault Comics. Now, I want to thank Drew, the co-host of Comics for Fun and Profit, for putting this episode together. Drew, thank you very much for all your hard work behind the scenes. And if you are a new listener, please check out new episodes of Comics for Fun and Profit that comes out every Saturday. And finally, I want to thank you, the listeners. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening to this episode. Until next time, guys, aloha.